Good afternoon and welcome again. I am Randi Braun and welcome to Something Major's Let's Do Lunch, Finding Your Voice and Owning Your Message. We are so glad that you could be here today, and please go ahead and introduce yourself. We want to hear from you in the chat. Where are you joining us from today? And while we wait for that to come in from all of you, let me go ahead and just reintroduce myself. Again, I'm Randi Braun. I'm an executive coach and the CEO of the women's leadership coaching and advisory firm, Something Major. I want to thank you all so much for coming. And I'm starting to see where you're all joining us here from today. We see people from Dallas, from Toronto, from Vancouver, New Jersey. We have some from Novo Nordisk. So I wonder if you're from New Jersey as well, where the HQ is, I believe. Oh my goodness, we even have someone from India, from New York City. It has been so much fun to do these events in the pandemic, and a regular occurrence that we get multiple countries, multiple continents. So again, I want to thank you so much, whether you're joining us from New Jersey, New York, Jacksonville, Florida, India, Canada, or elsewhere in the United States. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. For those of you who are new to Something Major, let me just introduce you to a little bit more about what we're about. We are a firm dedicated to empowering working women and working moms to live their very best lives, feeling more fulfilled, more successful, less burnt out, and like we are living and leading on purpose. Finding our voice and owning our message, of course, is a critical part of that. And that is why I am so glad that we could have this conversation today. For those of you who are return attendees to this series, Let's Do Lunch, welcome back to our final installment. And for those of you who are new, let's just rewind a little. Since January, we have been hosting this series called Let's Do Lunch, and it was a very simple premise. Born out of lack of connection in the pandemic, I honestly missed my friends, so did you. So each month, I invited an accomplished woman in my life who I have the privilege of calling a friend to sit down with me, chat with you, get together on the internet, and just talk about a topic that they're passionate about. While this will be our last virtual event of the season, I am thrilled to say that as the world reopens, we are so excited to host Realign and Recharge, which is our Working Mothers Retreat at the Four Seasons Georgetown on Friday, June 18th. So I hope some of you will join us there for that very intimate gathering, which is 100% outside. And we also have a sponsorship kit if you're interested in having your employer potentially help support you in joining us as leadership development. But back to where we are today. We're going to jump into our last Let's Do Lunch of the season, and I want to introduce you to a dear friend of mine, my own personal storytelling guru, Cierra Kaler-Jones. Cierra, are you with us?
I'm here. So good to see you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here. And everyone, please join me, Cierra, or rather, pardon me, sometimes with friends, I default to calling them by their first name, Dr. Kaler-Jones. Recently just graduated. Dr. Kaler-Jones, do you have the amazing cap?
I do.
I love it. So in the chat, let's give Dr. Kaler-Jones some love because she just finished her PhD program. And I'm so thrilled for her that she's going to be able to actually walk in person, celebrate with her family and her friends. So Dr. Kaler-Jones, we are so excited to have you. And I think that we are the first event that's hosting you as a newly minted doctor. So thank you so much again for coming and hanging out with me, and hanging with the Something Major community this afternoon.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and thank you all so much for your congratulatory messages in the chat. It's a very exciting season, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be able to celebrate and share it with all of you.
Well, speaking of a season of celebration, before we jump in, Dr. Kaler-Jones, I just want to go ahead and read everyone your bio so that they can get to know you a little bit better. Dr. Cierra Kaler-Jones is a social justice educator, writer, scholar, and artist based here in Washington, D.C. Dr. Kaler-Jones received her PhD from the Department of Teaching and Learning, Policy and Leadership at the University of Maryland, College Park, where she studied minority and urban education. Her writing has been found in Education Post, Naya Magazine, Midnight in Indigo, Medium, Ebony, the National Geographic Society education team's work, and that was after being commissioned by the federal government to do a project for them, and in a variety of peer-reviewed journals like the Middle School Journal. She has been an invited guest speaker at the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans and the United States Department of Ed. Her speaking credits also include the 2015 MARC Conference, a TED Talk at the 2018 TEDx Foggy Bottom Conference, and South by Southwest EDU 2021. She has given, wait for it, over 200 keynotes and workshops for organizations like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, We Work, Boys and Girls Clubs of America, and Girl Scouts USA, as well as a number of colleges and universities from Rutgers to Louisiana State, Monmouth University, Montclair State University, and even places like the National Museum of African American History and Culture. She took her love of storytelling in all of its forms, movement, speaking, and writing, and founded Unlock Your Story, a coaching and consulting business aimed at helping people tap into the stories they are bravely meant to share in the world. And, if I may add, home of one of the best newsletters on the internet. So we're going to be sending out Dr. Kaler-Jones's contact information later, and I cannot recommend highly enough subscribing to her newsletter. It is truly some of the best internet on the content. Dr. Kaler-Jones, I am so happy to have you here. I'm so happy to have you in my life. And let's just go ahead and jump right in. There are so many mediums where we can tell our stories, whether it is writing or utilizing social media or using our actual voice. I know your dissertation work was even focused on how we move our bodies. So while we want to take, questions from our audience today, and please throw those in the Q&A, while we wait for some of those to come in, can you help us share and understand how do we know the best way to actually communicate about our authentic selves?
Absolutely. And thank you for this question. Oftentimes we think of storytelling as only being sharing through our voice or only writing. And there are so many mediums, so many mechanisms in which we can share our most authentic story. And that can look like a variety of ways. But one thing that we try to do at Unlock Your Story is really just ask those critical questions about, what do you love to do? What makes you come alive? What makes you want to jump out of bed in the morning? And then using those tools, those strategies, those gifts, and those talents that you already have, and use that to tell your story. Another thing that we do at Unlock Your Story is that we have people do an energy audit. So looking throughout each day and writing down, I feel really energized when I do this task, and I feel really depleted when I do this task. And so thinking about those tasks that you do that really energize you. So for me, that's dance, it's movement, it's moving my body. And that's one way that I'm able to tell my story, by thinking about what types of motifs and choreography. And even when I do public speaking, I love to use my hands. I love to use my body to fully illustrate my points in a way that feels comfortable, but also feels energizing to me. And so I definitely invite you all, if you're looking for what is the medium, what is the mechanism for how I want to share my own story, think about doing an energy audit and just noting throughout the day of what tasks that you're doing, what hobbies that you're doing, what practices that you're doing that really fill you up and really light you up, so much so that then you'll be able to share your story and transcend your story in that medium.
I love that. And it actually reminds me of when I started something major and took it full time. A few people told me, you have to be on Twitter. You have to be on Twitter.
Yes.
And, professionally, I grew up doing business development and sales, and I worked for a variety of political and policy focused organizations. And my association with Twitter is just like world's dumpster fire, like the place where the most brilliant people supposedly in our country go to like throw rotten tomatoes at each other. And I was like, absolutely positively not. Like, I don't want to hang out on Twitter, right? Like, I like to hang out on LinkedIn. I like to hang out having conversations like this. I love to move my body. It took me a long time because I never thought I was a good dancer to enjoy it. But now I love doing things like 305 Fitness. So, I think that really, Dr. Kaler-Jones, I see this all the time with my clients, and I think you do with yours probably as well. It's just like this draw to just letting it be easy. Mm-hmm. Like, what feels easy and what can happen when we lean into making it feel easy instead of trying to make things that feel hard feel less hard? Mm-hmm. Do you see that sometimes?
Absolutely, all the time. I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to fit into molds. And because of that pressure that we put on ourselves, sometimes we show up in spaces not fully feeling comfortable in what we want to share. And so really thinking about ways to transition and lean into, I love that, lean into the easiness. I'm also a yoga instructor and meditation guide. And part of what I try to bring into those classes that then also, of course, flows into the Unlock Your Story work is moving with ease. And so how to create those easeful moments in your life. And one of the ways to do those is storytelling shouldn't be hard, because we do it every single day in our daily practices, in our conversations with one another, in our social media posts, in how we interact at work. Every way in which we interact every single day is really deeply rooted in storytelling. So finding those easeful moments where storytelling automatically shows up makes the process that much easier.
And it's so important that women tell their stories. It's so important at work we tell stories about the incredible work we're doing. It's so important in our personal lives that we believe in the things that we know inside of us that are worthy to be shared with other people. And I know that you and I are both so passionate about working with other women. So help us understand, what got you passionate about doing this work with other women?
Oh, yes. So I always think about how storytelling has really been my through line throughout my entire life. I think about being a young child and loving to consume stories. I used to love reading so much that I would lock myself in my room and read a book in one day and then run back to my parents and be like, can we go back to the bookstore? And it eventually got to the point where they were like, Cierra, we need to get you a library card because this is just too much. And so I love to consume stories for myself, but I also love to write stories. I would make up stories about people in my neighborhood and just different experiences to really internalize some of the emotions and experiences and even places that I had not yet seen, trying to think about how I could move through those spaces by imagining and being creative. And so that love of storytelling ultimately transcended through my experiences growing up. A story that I tell often is that when I was in high school, I was very shy. I was so shy, so much so to the point where I hated raising my hand in class. I was afraid of having the wrong answer. I was afraid of fumbling over my words. And so I was very quiet. And it wasn't until my high school district, they cut the arts programs because there were significant budget cuts to the district. And that was the first time in my life that I felt overwhelmingly passionate about something. Being a dancer since the age of 5, I could not imagine my school day without that reprieve or that release of being able to walk into the dance studio and to be able to move in ways and communicate with my body, emotions and feelings and thoughts and experiences that I didn't quite have the vocabulary to articulate. And so I'll never forget, I organized friends and teachers and my family and community members to show up at the Board of Education meeting and to advocate for the arts programs. And after lots of advocating at board meetings and also through social media and starting a campaign, we were successful in securing the arts programs or funding back for the arts programs. And for me, that was such a pivotal moment in my life because I began to think about how, one, I couldn't believe that my story was important. I had this epiphany of, wow, I actually, one, have a story, and two, that people genuinely will listen. And then that could cause change. Things could change because of my own story. And so from my own experiences, I saw when I went to college how I minored in women's and gender studies and race and ethnic studies, and I was part of the women's residential college at Rutgers University, Douglas Residential College. So hello to all of my New Jersey friends on the call that I see in the chat. So good to be with some Jersey folks. And in the courses, my first couple of years, I was realizing that a lot of the sexism that I experienced, a lot of the racism that I experienced wasn't a singular experience, but rather collective, that this was based in structural and systemic aspects that then transcended into my own life. And I was sitting next to other people who are also raising their hands, other women, and saying, that happened to me too. That happened to me too. And that happened to me too. And I realized that it was not just the individual telling of the stories, but the collective power, what I call narrative power building, of being able to share these stories collectively with others, and then seeing the differences, but also the similarities in the stories. And so a compilation of those three experiences really made me feel so tied to ensuring that other women felt comfortable and felt confident in being able to share their own stories with the world.
And something you hit on, you just mentioned collective experience, and you said earlier in your own experience, so afraid that we are going to have the wrong answer. And you tell that story about being a child, coming up through grade school. I see that, and I know you do too, all the time with your clients. I see it with my clients, is women who have great ideas at work,
Yes.
Phenomenal ideas. And this isn't something that, one day you're a manager in your 20s, and then when you become an executive in your 30s or 40s, or really step into that executive power in your 50s and 60s, it just instantaneously goes away, right? That idea of that self-judgment and that fear about raising our hand, having the wrong answer, I see it as one of the top things that really holds women back from sharing their ideas in the workplace, and a shame around that of, why does everyone else seem like they have such great ideas, but I can't?
Yes.
Right? And so I'm curious, we don't like the word here at Something Major, imposter syndrome, because like you talked about, this is systemic. This is really more about our own inner critics. And, figuring out how we're not broken, right? Imposter syndrome connotes that we're broken, but we do have these inner critics that have developed in response to the worlds that we've grown up in that get the best of us sometimes. And so I'm curious, especially, and Dr. Kaler-Jones, we're going to talk about storytelling in so many different mediums, but, how do you work with some of your clients, especially those who are, working in workplaces where they want to share their ideas, but they're afraid to? What are some of your best tips for them about feeling more empowered or emboldened to speak up and share their ideas?
And I love this question, because one thing that we talk about often at Unlock Your Story, we have this silly acronym that we use, GUP, give up perfection. And just as you said, I see that all the time, specifically in women, that there is this fear, this perfectionism that bubbles up, of course, because of external pressures. And so moving beyond that to just give up perfection, right? And even asking those critical questions of, why do I even feel the need to be perfect? What even is perfection, right? So mussing up and also dismantling this concept that we will one day be actualized, or that we will one day be perfect. Because the reality is, there's so much magic in the messiness that makes us human. And also part of that is that the messiness in our stories allows us to forge deeper relationships with other people. And so when we say GUP, when we say GUP, we also talk about that stories are supposed to be messy. They're supposed to be nuanced. And right now in Unlock Your Story, we're heading into our last week of a new course that we just launched called Sharing Your Authentic Story to Land Your Dream Job. And so one of the things that we've been doing when we're talking about public speaking and interviewing is getting to the root of why some of that perfectionism and why it bubbles up, and then how it manifests. So for example, in public speaking, we may sometimes find ourselves in a position where we talk really fast because we just want to get all of the ideas out. And part of that is twofold. One, it's a human response to a stressful situation when we're nervous.
Yes.
Fear is public speaking is one of the top fears of the human experience, and our bodies go into flight, fight, or freeze. And so when we speed up our speaking, we do that as a flight response. We're like, how fast can we get out of this situation? So we talk fast. And then secondly, because as women, we are often taught to not take up as much space, whether that be with our actual physical body or with our voices. And so even when we have really important things to say, we find ourselves speeding through it, or even holding back and thinking to ourselves, oh, this is not going to be a good idea. What if somebody says that's not a good idea? And then, as oftentimes happens with women, someone else takes your idea and then they try to take credit.
Of
So
course.
one of the things that we
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
to do at Unlock Your Story is really get to the root causes, the why. Why is my favorite question, or why is my favorite sentence? Why question mark? Really getting to the root of why we are afraid to share our stories in the workplace, because most of the time the reasons why are not a singular experience. It's of course not anything that is wrong with us or wrong with our ideas, but rather thinking about how do we simultaneously share our stories and then also disrupt and dismantle the structures and systems that have for too long told us that our voices, that we shouldn't take up space with our voices. And one thing that I've realized too is that when we do garner this sense of confidence to share our stories, particularly in the workplace, it gives other people permission to do it too. And so it is twofold in that we are sharing it for ourselves, but also giving permission to other people. And that helps to start to dismantle some of these structures and systems that police and control the ways that we share our stories and the ways that we voice our experiences.
And speaking of, these systemic realities, we got a comment in the chat that I'd love to let you respond to. This is from Bernadette. We actually need to take up space. We actually take up space and need to own it. The problem with women of color is that we tend to be larger than others, which is why a 16-year-old child was killed by police because they thought she was an adult. So Dr. Kaler-Jones, I see that resonated, and I'm sure it resonated with some of the other folks who are joining us here today. Your thoughts and your response on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is, and thank you so much, Bernadette, for sharing that, because this is part of my heart's work. My dissertation focused on how Black girls use arts-based practices like movement, music, hair as forms of resistance and identity construction. And we see in the research, there's a study that was produced by the Georgetown Center on poverty and inequality about how Black girls are adultified as young as 5 years old. And to think about how those stories then manifest. And this is something we talk a lot about at Unlock Your Story, because it's not only just the narrative, is how the narrative then transcends into action. And so thinking about narrative power building, how do we share those stories? How do we also push people to get to the root of why these acts happen, is really thinking about how do we get to the root causes of racism, anti-Black racism? How do we get to the root causes of oppression? How do we get to the root causes of heteropatriarchy that then leads to sexism? And so really pushing people to think about the historical aspects of how these actions have always shown up again and again and again. Like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie in her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, says that when we tell a story again and again about something, that is what it becomes. And so there's so many connections between who gets to tell the story, and that's all about power, right? Who has the power to be able to shape and shift the national narratives, and then those narratives cause people to act. And those actions could either uphold the status quo, or they could dismantle and disrupt the status quo.
And, we got a few more comments from Bernadette. We want to hear from all of you. Please feel free to pop any questions for us in the Q&A. And, Dr. Kaler-Jones, to who has the power to tell the story, one of the things Bernadette noted is, there's a lot of talk about the new Underground Railroad series by Barry Jenkins. And just commenting on the fact that it's a different narrative and incredible. We got another question from Bernadette about hair, which we are going to come back to in just a few minutes. And Bernadette, if you could please pop that into the Q&A, that is going to help us make sure that we do not lose track of it and that we can come back to it. Before we jump to Bernadette's questions, and again, we want to hear questions from everyone else, you said something that is so resonant. And when I used to work in an office, I saw it all the time, which is that women, they do speak up, and when they finally get the opportunity to, they just rush to try and get everything that they want to say so quickly. And in addition, I'm curious how you feel about these. I've often seen other people's kryptonites is sharing their ideas in the form of a question. Oh, have we thought about doing XYZ? I used to work with this woman. She was so talented. And every time she would raise her hand in a meeting, she'd say, have we thought about? And I just wanted to say to her, please, please, have you thought about it? Because it's clearly a great idea. Or, and this is my personal kryptonite, is using crutch words and hedge words. In fact, the best gift a boss ever gave me was telling me that I said the word actually something like 20 times in the middle of a 45-minute pitch with a client. That is once every 2 minutes. And so just kind of getting aware about where are we holding ourselves back, not just intellectually, emotionally, but when we're delivering those ideas, is it speaking really quickly? Is it using questions? Is it using crutch words? And I'm curious how you see that play out in the work that you do.
Oh, yes, all the time. The question is definitely one that shows up quite often, and even encouraging people. One of my mentors, David Johns, always would say, no is a full sentence, period, full stop. And so I take that not only for the no, but when we are sharing something that's important to us, when we have a good idea, ending it, period, full stop. And sometimes that's hard because we want to. And even one of the things we talk about on Unlock Your Story with our public speaking workshops is just the inflection in our voice of when we inflect upwards at the end of a sentence as a way of communicating, yes, that we're not sure. And then another thing too that I learned actually from, for everyone that's on the call, Randi and I had the opportunity to meet through one of my other roles as a 305 fitness instructor. And so in being a fitness instructor, one of the things that I learned was that when I'm excited, I talk like this really high in my voice, and then it also hurts your throat. And so one of the things that that we talk about and we work with folks through is even just speaking from your diaphragm, like speaking deep in from your core as a physical signaling to yourself, as a reminder of like the power behind your voice. Like there's a bodily power that goes into every single word that we say and every idea that we say. And so really moving
Is there an
in a
exercise?
Position. Yes.
Sorry, I got really excited.
Yes.
And I will say, right, we got a comment about not saying excuse me when we went into a room. We got a comment about over apologizing. And I'm a big believer. You say sorry for when you mean it. And I did say sorry to Dr. Kaler-Jones because I got so excited that I spoke over her. So I am sorry, not using it as some woman, you know, as some women's kind of crutch word. Is there a somatic exercise? Is there a diaphragm exercise we could do right now? I'm putting you a little on the spot with this. So I regret that, but if you're up for it, I would love to hear more about that.
Yes, yes, yes. I love this one because it also is just, it adds levity to the conversations. And so the way that I've practiced this is I actually take my hand and I put it on my stomach and I let out a ha, as if something is funny, but it's not. And I'm pretending to laugh at someone's joke, but taking the ha deep down from in your stomach and pushing out the air. Ha!
Should we all try it together?
Let's do it.
Okay, so just a hand on my belly, doesn't matter which one?
Yes.
Okay.
And just letting out the ha.
Ha.
Yes, and letting it come from that space and really exhaling as you do it. Ha.
Ha.
Yes.
I love this. Okay. And I notice I'm sitting up straighter too.
Because a lot of times we speak up from within our throat. And so what does it mean to have that strength, that power that we all have, and just being able to tap into that for ourselves. And I love, love, love that you mentioned sorry, because that is my kryptonite. One of my greatest friends always says to me, why are you sorry? Whenever I say sorry, all the time. So it's really nice to have what could be an accountability partner. And as you said, when you had a supervisor tell you about saying actually, oftentimes I had a supervisor that told me to follow my intuition, because I found myself in a lot of work spaces where I was holding back from sharing my ideas because, again, of that fear that continued to bubble up. And I kept thinking to myself, what if this isn't a good idea? What if someone thinks that this is dumb? And her saying that to me, saying, trust your intuition because it's always right. Every time you've shared something, it is really thoughtful. And so really allowing ourselves to tap into that intuitive space to know that we have a good idea and then sharing it is so incredibly important because
One is,
no one, oh, so go ahead.
no, you go, you
Okay.
finish.
I was just going to say that no one else in the world is you, and no one else in the world has your story. And even when it comes to ideas, we might think, oh, somebody has the same exact idea as us. That's not true, because then they can't execute it in the same way that you do, because we each have our own individual experiences, our individual knowledge bases, our individual ways of moving and being in the world. And so really leaning into that power and that remembrance that no one else is you and they can't deliver on that idea. And there are nuances, right, that even show up in the idea that someone else doesn't have except for you, right? So don't deny the world your gift of experience by holding back your story or holding back on what you want to share.
And the fear is so real. And one of the things, to your point about just intuitively sharing your ideas, one of the things I often do with my clients when they have an idea they want to share, or they're thinking about something where they're going to have to speak up around something, is actually following their fear to the end game. So going through an exercise, okay, what happens if I raise my hand in this meeting or I put forth an idea? Follow your fear to the end game. Is it that you're going to give an idea that's so bad that you're going to get fired, and then you're going to not be able to pay your rent or your mortgage, and then you're going to be homeless on the street? Probably not. Like 99.999% of the time, probably not. And sometimes following our fear to the end game can just show us almost like how hilarious and hyperbolic it is, right? It's like, wait, that one little tiny remote chance of something ridiculously hyperbolic happening is the reason I'm not going to show up and share my idea. And so actually, I recommend pen and paper, writing it out, following your fear to the end game. It is very illuminating. Dr. Kaler-Jones, I know that you're just wrapping up this course. You developed it. Highly encourage everyone to check it out the next time that you run it again at Unlock Your Story, about using your story to land your dream job. We have some women here in all different walks of life. Some women are in leadership positions who are running teams. Some women here are in their 20s who are thinking about what the next 4 decades or so of their career are going to be, and everywhere in between. What are some of your best tips for speaking up and owning that story at work, whether it's kind of landing the new job, or we've talked a lot about just speaking up in a meeting and sharing your ideas?
Mm-hmm. One piece of advice that I always give to folks is that I'm really big on what I like to call receipts. So I like to have receipts that show, that illustrate, that have examples. So when we think about telling stories, we oftentimes don't think about the stories that we tell every day at work, whether that's raising our hand and sharing an idea, or we're giving a presentation, or even the number of meetings that we go into with someone for the first time and we're building a relationship with them. And the first question they ask is, okay, tell me about yourself, right? And that's a story. It's an exchange of story in that moment. And we do that every day. And so in having receipts, one of the ways that we oftentimes don't think about how our stories show up is on things like performance evaluations or written documents. And so one thing that I do in terms of having receipts is, as a researcher, I also think about this as having both qualitative data and quantitative data. So more numerical data. And then of course, the data that gets deeper into the how, who, what, where, when, how, and why. And one of the ways that I do this, particularly in my work as the director of storytelling for an organization, is I put a calendar hold on my calendar for every 6 months where I go in and I just track my metrics. So I run social media, newsletter, different things like that. And in those different communication strategies in the organization, I'll just go in and look, okay, how many followers do I have, or how many followers do we have? How many people are subscribed to the newsletter? How did it grow from the past 6 months to now? And there's a story embedded in that, right? What does the data show us about the differences between now and then. And so in having receipts, I also collect qualitative data. So if I get really good feedback from someone, whether it be via email or whether someone is sharing with me verbally, I'll type it up, I'll write the date, I'll write who said it. And then when it comes time for a performance evaluation or some type of goal setting conversation, I have those stories already ready to go. And I don't have to think too hard about it because I've done the work along the way. And so really thinking about, okay, how can I collect my own data? Because we're all researchers, right? We all have questions and interests in the world that we're trying to explore. And in this sense, in the sense of a workplace, of trying to explore how we show up in the workplace and how our goals are manifesting and how we're achieving those goals. And so that's a very practical, logistical piece of advice that I use, and really just using those receipts to tell the story of who you are at work and really being able to communicate your value and your impact, because it's there. And sometimes, again, that fear shows up to say, oh gosh, I'm not really sure what I did over this past year. But if you have that data, if you have those metrics, you can pull them out, and then you can use that qualitative data to share really illustrative examples of what this looked like and how it showed up. I think about Brene Brown talks about how storytelling is just data with soul. I love that. Like data with soul, then share, like, what does the data say? But then what are the nuances and the complexities behind the numbers that can really illustrate who you are and how you show up in the workplace?
And one of my favorite Brene Brownisms is this idea of shitty first drafts, right?
Yes.
That, when you said GUP, right, give up perfection, I think about, so many things I've done over time that evolve, right? And it just takes reps for us to do these things. By the way, I want to respond to what you just said, Dr. Kaler-Jones, and I want to invite everyone who's here. Please feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A. We absolutely want to hear from you. But what you said about saving the receipts, I, for many years, kept a folder when I worked for other people called Save Smiley Face. And I would just, like you, just pop them in. And then when it was performance review time, I was like, oh, here's my performance review.
Yep.
Or for those of you, depending on the nature of your jobs, especially if you work in a client-facing role, for years, if I had a client that just loved me, felt like would write me an email saying, thank you, you helped me so much with this thing, I would write them back and I would say, I really appreciate that. It's such a pleasure working with you. Here's my boss's email address. Would you do me a favor and pass that feedback along to him or her? And I did that for years. And Dr. Kaler-Jones, it was a woman at my very first job. She mentored me. Now today she's almost retired, and she told me, she said, she's like, trust me, it's a lot easier for you today than it was for me. This is one of the best things you can do through your career. And she gave me that tip when I was like 23 years old, and I did it for years and years and years. And that's just another thing, right? Is not just telling our own story, but enabling other people around us to amplify our stories. And so while we wait for any more kind of Q&A to come in, they just did. I'm just going to read these here. One question we had is, or someone just responded, the other thing you should ask is that if you had a client who liked your work, ask them to send an email and send it to your boss. So, that might have come in right before I said that. But yeah, a handwritten note, even better. We got another question, Dr. Kaler-Jones. How can we show up confidently in telling our story while we are still in the process of what it is, who we are? This person says, they're currently in the weeds of self-discovery. I think anyone who's living a life worth living should always be in the weeds of self-discovery for what that's worth. So Dr. Kaler-Jones, any thoughts on that, especially when you're in that achingly raw place of kind of figuring out who you are, what you're going to be in this next phase?
Yes. And I love this question because one of the things that is really important to me and important to our work is recognizing that the most important person that you ever tell your story to is yourself, first and foremost. And then coupled with that is that you don't owe anybody your story. So if you don't want to, or you are still in a place of leaning into the messiness of self-discovery, is that the only person sometimes that we need to share and show up with that story is with us. So I'm a huge proponent of journaling. And we have this exercise that we do at Unlock Your Story where folks draw their life map. So thinking about different places and spaces that and events and situations that have made you who you are, what pivotal moments have shaped you into who you are, and really getting to that through line. So I mentioned my own through line earlier is storytelling. And it's the common thread that strands and weaves together all of the things in your life that fulfill you, that give your life's purpose and meaning. And then even thinking, what does your through line tell you about you? And so even as you're navigating through your own story, know that you don't owe anybody your story, and share the parts that you feel comfortable with. Continue to unpack, continue to discover, continue to understand. And I always think about the great James Baldwin says that not everything is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And so as you're going through a self-discovery process, being able to create what I like to call sacred space for yourself, whether that be through journaling or meditation or movement or whatever it is that you find that quiet space for yourself to lean into how you share your story with yourself. We talk about sharing our stories with ourselves all the time at Unlock Your Story because it really can shape the ways that we view ourselves and the ways that we view ourselves as around us. It's getting to making sense of our lived experiences and who we are, like who are we? And we're all in pursuit of this really philosophical question of who am I? And that changes.
All of life's great questions, right?
Yeah,
all of life's
changes.
Great and important questions.
Absolutely. It shifts and it changes over time, and really giving ourselves permission to lean into that for ourselves.
And I'm just going to tell a quick story about really the power of putting yourself out there. And Dr. Kaler-Jones and I had sushi last week, and I was telling her this story. You know, when I decided to put together Let's Do Lunch back in January, I knew for me that I wanted to create something to hang out with my friends and frankly, to meet a lot of the people who read my newsletter. But the reason I didn't do it sooner, when I missed my friends in July, or I missed my friends in November, or I missed my friends in December, I was really scared. I was really scared that I was going to ask my amazing girlfriends to come, and we were going to sit in a webinar room like this, and nobody was going to show up. And really, what I just decided to do was, like you said, Dr. Kaler-Jones, is like, what just feels easy for me hanging out with my friends? What do I want to do? I want to connect with the people who read my newsletter. I guess I'll do an event or two and see how it goes. Incredibly, we have had people join from India, from Scotland, from other places in the UK, from South Africa, from all over the United States and North America. And what's so cool is we've had so many new people join our community. The outcome, meeting new people, is exactly what I wanted, but the realization of how that came to be was so different.
Yes.
And it was so scary for me, right? And I just want to normalize this, right? Because Dr. Kaler-Jones, if anyone looks at me or looks at you, and this is how I personally feel, so correct me if I'm wrong and you feel differently. If anyone looks at me as a coach and is like, your life is like shiny and perfect, I have done them a disservice, right? Because we're all figuring this out together. We all have fear. We all have self-doubt. We all have ideas we want to share with the world, but we're scared sometimes. And, you know, it's really, as we're closing out Let's Do Lunch for the season, I couldn't think of a more important topic, because how we tell our stories is so important. And I'm curious, you know, as you think about this shift that we're going through, Dr. Kaler-Jones, you know, people, they don't know if they're going to go back to the office. They don't know if they're going to stay at home. 1 in 4 Americans is actually thinking about getting a new job right now, according to an article I just read from NBC the other day. What do you think is really important about storytelling in this moment right now and owning and sharing our ideas?
Ooh. Wow. So many things. So I'll share an example. Over last summer, so summer 2020, in addition to my work with Unlock Your Story, I'm also, first and foremost, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. And so with the students that I worked with, high school aged Black girls, we started a program called Black Girls Soar, so scholarship, organizing, arts, and resistance. And throughout this program, we collected oral history testimonies of our loved ones, because we realized that we are living in history every single day. And to be able to actually put down those stories, to ask our grandparents if they're still with us, to ask our aunties, to ask our friends, to ask our loved ones, our caregivers, to ask people in our community about what their experiences are like today, just recognizing that we are living in history. We're living in a pivotal moment. And so what does it mean to catalog the experiences as they're happening now? And one of the reasons why we collected oral history testimonies is because what my students had shared with me, my co-researchers, as I like to call them, my co-researchers had shared with me, is that too often in school, they open the textbook and the textbook is deficit-based. The textbook doesn't talk about Black history. The textbook doesn't include key moments in history. It doesn't talk about solidarity. It doesn't talk about collective power building. And so their overarching question was, well, what if we reclaimed the textbooks and wrote it ourselves? And so what does it mean to think about how our stories are showing up in this present moment, even if it's just our journals, even if it's just the conversations that we're having with friends, even if it's a conversation like this one, right? Because if we were to have this conversation next year, it might be different. And if we were to have this conversation 2 years ago, it would have looked different. And so what does it mean to truly catalog our experiences in the moment, to recognize that history is being made every single day? And again, pulling power back into this is that who gets to tell the story is dependent on power. And so reclaiming our stories to then be able to share those with the world provides more. And this is what jazzes me up so much about storytelling, is that when we share our stories, we provide more nuance, more complexity to what the human experience is. Because for too long, we've only been told that it can be one thing or one way, and then everyone else has to conform to that way. And so what does it mean to truly catalog our experiences in the moment, to be able to claim and reclaim the stories that we already have shared? Because for all the historical context is people, when I say people, I'm thinking about Black and Brown, I'm thinking about historically marginalized and minoritized communities have always shared their stories. They've always shared their stories, but that aspect of power and who gets to hold the pen. And I think about there's an African proverb, and it goes, until the lion has its own historian, the story will always glorify that of the hunter. And so really sharing our stories to then be able to reclaim what the human experience is and show that it's not just one thing, that we are multifaceted, holistic human beings in this world. And we show up with our joys, we show up with our pains, we show up with our struggles, we show up with our successes, and really categorizing that and putting that down so that in years to come, we'll be able to look back, or we'll be able to pass down our stories to our families, to our communities.
And, back to what you were just sharing, and we talked a little bit about this at the upfront, we got another kind of question comment from Bernadette around, again, just what could happen if we could free ourselves from imposter syndrome, right? Knowing what we shared at the beginning of this conversation around the fact that imposter syndrome is really systemic, right? And it's a way that and when I say we, depending on your, the color of your skin, your station socioeconomically, we all experience things very differently. I know the we that is here today is a group of women who care about having important conversations with other women, but every single person here has a different background and a different experience. And so, when I say we, I'm curious, Dr. Kaler-Jones, what you think to Bernadette's question is, what could happen? What could change if we could feel more empowered? if we could feel less imposter syndrome. You shared some of the changes that you want to see in our society and in our workplaces, and I'm curious if you have any other thoughts on this, because I think this resonates with a lot of the people who are joining us here today.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, there's so many things to unpack, because when it comes to storytelling and so in my work outside of Unlock Your Story, and doing narrative power building with communities, particularly Black and Brown communities, I think about often how narratives are shaped and shifted, again, by power. And so that could be in research, it could be in media, and even in public discourse. So the ways that we all talk about these issues every single day. We see it now where there are attacks to teaching people's history. There are attacks to teaching a full history. And so the reason why there are attacks is because people are doing it. There's pushback because it's happening. And so there are so many levels in which storytelling plays a crucial role, from that moment that we're all in school and we take in stories through the textbooks, through the curriculum, and then we become adults and we take in stories through the media, and now we take in stories from social media. And so when we feel comfortable and confident in being able to share our own stories and providing that nuance, that complexity to the human experience, it gives a fuller picture, when for so long the picture was only just a sliver of what the human experience was. So I just say that there are so many levels at which storytelling has to happen. Everything from the federal government, and we talk a lot about this in my work too, funding and budgets, because budgets are moral documents and you communicate a story through where you invest your time and your energy and your money. And that shows up and that's how storytelling shows up in a multitude of ways. But when we're able to claim and reclaim our stories, and even as you said earlier about not using the word imposter syndrome, and I see the question too in the Q&A, is that we're not imposters. we're human beings, and rather it is structural and systemic forces that then make individuals feel certain ways about how they operate in the world, and that turns into action, right? It's very real for so many people. And so how do we move away from then even using the term, because there's so much power in every word that we use and how we use it. And so how do we then move beyond those words to find words that are more encompassing of the full human experience?
Absolutely. And what we're going to do today is, when we send everyone out all of the links and the resources from today, there's a phenomenal article that was penned by a professor. She doesn't work at Harvard, but she wrote for HBR, Harvard Business Review, about why we need to ditch imposter syndrome, because really everything that's wrapped up in that is beliefs about, gender and race and even class in our society. So if you haven't seen that article, I feel like it's just gone viral. If you have seen it, you should read it again. If you haven't seen it, we're going to put that on required reading. And, Dr. Kaler-Jones, as we start to bring this to a close in a few minutes, at the beginning of the conversation, we started talking so much about, why we feel nervous and what's the cost of speaking up. We might be wrong. We might look stupid. I think what I'm so appreciative of for our conversation today is just how you've shared with us the cost of not sharing our ideas. What's the cost of not sharing our stories? And so I certainly hope that everyone who has joined us here today will not only continue to, and again, maybe it's just baby steps, right? Crawl, walk, run. Will think about how they can share their stories. I cannot say this enough, and we're going to send Dr. Kaler-Jones's contact information out there. I encourage you to check out her website, her newsletter. I literally email her every single week. It feels like just being like, the newsletter gets better and better. And I've been doing that for years. I mean, it is just a phenomenal newsletter. And just her workshops are the bomb. And so, Dr. Kaler-Jones, I want to thank you just so much, not just for your friendship. It's really been friends, I feel like, that have gotten us through the pandemic, but also just for joining us here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I appreciate this conversation. Thanks to everyone that showed up. Thank you for your questions. And as you talk about our newsletter, I definitely just want to shout out my colleague, Elisa, who has done an incredible job at pulling together those narratives. And, you know, it takes a village. It takes a village to be able to do this work. And part of storytelling and feeling comfortable and confident in sharing our stories is, of course, dismantling the structures and systems that deny us the opportunities to do that, but also surrounding ourselves with good people. So Randi, so thankful for you and all of the things that I've learned from you over the past few years that we've been able to be friends. And surrounding ourselves with good people that inspire us and encourage us to continue sharing our stories, even when it feels like a stretch for us.
Absolutely. And to that end, as we kind of part ways today, I just sent a link in the chat. This is our last Let's Do Lunch. If you want to watch a recording of any of the ones we've done on living fearlessly, sessions we've done on quieting your inner critic, I want to enjoy this time together with you and keep it going. So thank you again. And as we close, I also want to just invite any of the Washingtonians who are with us today, who are moms. I would love to host you. I see some women here who actually are already signed up for our Working Moms Retreat, Realign and Recharge at the Four Seasons Hotel in Georgetown on, I was about to say May, on June 18th. Again, thank you. I'm Randi Braun. I am an executive coach and the founder of Something Major. We're a women's leadership coaching and consulting firm, really geared towards helping working women and working moms live and lead on purpose. I want to wish you all well as you enjoy your summers, as we enter the return. And I know I speak for Dr. Kaler-Jones and myself when I say that we really hope to see you soon and look forward to staying in touch. So be well, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.